I am Gerard Thompson. I'm a Central High School student going into the 11th grade, and I'm here with.
Tito Valdes, pronouns he, him, his, and I'm the director of LGBTQ plus affairs for the city of Philadelphia.
Nice. Okay, I want to start off with a little bit of a background. So, what do you do? Who are you as a person? Things like that.
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is that I'm not from Philly. I moved here in 2016. I'm an attorney by training, so I came here once I finished up law school, and I was an attorney for the Philadelphia Department of Human Services, which is the agency that investigates reports of child abuse. And then I was at the DA's office. I was a special victims DA, helping survivors navigate the criminal justice system. And now I'm in my current role as the director of LGBTQ plus affairs, which essentially just involves involving the mayor, advising the mayor and related city agencies about all things related to the community.
Okay. Um, Now that you mention it, how did you get there? How did you, what helped you get to where you are now?
Yeah, I think a lot of the job has essentially allowed me to leverage all the connections that I've established over the last decade in government, whether it's necessary conversations with the police and how they interact with our community, or conversations with my colleagues at the Department of Human Services around trans kids in the group home setting or in the foster care system generally, and just making sure that the services that we provide as a city are competent, that they see people, that they value people, that they respect people's humanity, and that that's something that's done at a city level as opposed to just living in my office.
Mhm. And how did what you view and value as a person help you get to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I'll say is that LGBT people are not a monolith, right? So I fully understand and appreciate that my experience may not be like someone else's, but at the same time, growing up, particularly as an Afro-Latino queer person in central Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from, I understand what it's like to have opportunities be limited because of who you are. And so I think for me, the biggest thing is listening, right? I didn't step into this role assuming that I know all of the issues and by extension, the answers, right? So just listening to people, talking to young people, talking to people across the city agencies, the different nonprofits that serve our community to really get a sense of what's going on the ground, what I should prioritize, what are the biggest issues.
Mhm. So, since pride is about being seen, accepted, and valued for what you believe internally, how do you display that in your office?
Yeah, so like I said, a big part of that is listening. I think oftentimes leaders think that it's got to be your voice all of the time, and I actually take the opposite approach. I think it's important to listen to really get a sense so that anything that we do as an office or as a city generally, that it is responsive to the actual needs of the community. And so what that looks like is constantly having meetings across the city, meeting with people like you, to hear from you and so that you can hear from me, but also meeting with, like I said, the area nonprofits across the city to really get a sense of, what's going on, what are the challenges that LGBT people are facing, whether it's young LGBT people, LGBT older adults, issues with respect to accessing healthcare, getting jobs, right? Queer people really want the same things as everybody else. We want to be able to work, we want to be able to pay our bills, we want to be able to get access to healthcare, and we want to be safe, right? So just getting a sense from people that are doing the work on the grounds or actually having the lived experience of being a queer person in this city about what are the priorities, right? So that I think that's kind of a good answer to your question.
Mhm. So, about challenges, if someone is going through challenges, finding out about their identity, what they value, what's going on about them internally, what would you say to make them feel better?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say to any particularly young LGBT person that is struggling with their identity is that to the extent that you carry any level of shame on your shoulders, it doesn't belong to you. And that regardless of what your current circumstances are, that this current moment isn't going to define what your possibilities are. That you can literally accomplish anything that you want to. And I say that from experience, right? I come from a home that wasn't very accepting. When I was 15 years old when my parents found out that I was a member of the community, and my dad's response was to kick me out of my home. So I navigated homelessness as a 15-year-old person, and honestly, there were times where I wanted to give up. Figuring out how to apply for financial aid without really any support was really, really challenging. But I found mentors along the way, both in the community and outside of the community, allies that sponsored me and allowed me to kind of show up as my full self. And I promise you that you will too.
So you just touched on, you going through, finding out, trying to find your way through the world, the new world that was forcefully created for you. So is that the part of your story that has the biggest influence on what you do now, or is there something else?
I would say, yeah, I would say so. I mean, to kind of talk more about my dad is a person who really struggled for most of my childhood with addiction and alcoholism. And so we saw a lot. We had to grow up a lot quicker than we probably should have, my siblings and I. And I think that that has essentially informed everything about what I've done in my career, right? So as I mentioned, I was an attorney for DHS. That was really intentional, right? I think the child welfare system, we can examine, how it interacts with certain communities, but it is a lifeline for some, that are really experiencing a lot of horrible situations at home. So I think both, and my experience as a queer kid, trying to play basketball and do all the things that normal kids do, while seeing those opportunities essentially limited because of who I am and who I was.
Yeah. So what kind of impact does you and what you do have on the LGBTQ plus population of America?
Yeah, so I see our first. I'll say I've been in the role for 4 months. I was appointed by Mayor Parker on March 2nd.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So it's been a long 4 months, especially the month of June, as you can probably imagine with all of the events. But at this point, what has occupied most of my time has been kind of echoing what I said earlier. This what I've called a listening tour, and I've met with probably over 60 community leaders from across the nonprofit landscape, from the business community, and also leaders across government to really get a sense of what's going on. And I think that based on those conversations, our office has essentially two functions, right? Number one is internal, right? So we advise the mayor and related city agencies on anything involving our community. And that's on a case-by-case basis, right? Whatever's going on, any new laws that are passed at the federal level or at the state level that may or may not have an impact on the community. And then the other part is an external one, right? So before my appointment, this office was vacant for a very long time. And so I see a big part of my role as being external and forward-facing, and just being visible, showing up to as many of events and supporting and amplifying all of the life-saving work that a lot of our organizations do. And in terms of our priorities, again, based on those conversations that I've been having, I would say that they essentially fall into three buckets, right? So public safety, right? So having conversations with the police about what it means to offer culturally competent services to the communities that they swear to protect and serve. Access to affirming healthcare, right? So how do we help people get connected and remain connected to healthcare that they deserve and need in order to sustain their lives? And then workforce development, right? Or economic empowerment generally. So I think over the next couple months, I'm really excited to start rolling out some of our initiatives. But I see our role as a convener. I think one thing I've found is that as a city, we actually do have a lot of resources for folks, whether you're trying to start a small business or trying to join the police department or really any other route that you can think of. But we don't always do a good job of kind of advertising what the resources are. So I think my job, my role is to build bridges between organizations that should have been talking a long time ago, but for whatever reason, those conversations haven't happened organically. So I want to be a part of building those bridges.
Yeah. Okay. So you talked about everything that you did in June, or you lightly talked about it. Can you go more in depth on some of the events and celebrations that you did for not even just the month of June, primarily that, but also just what you've been doing since you've been in your office?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the month of June, our main event that we helped to organize was the Community Health and Help Expo, which was organized in partnership with the Ahmaud Butler Foundation. And it essentially brought over 300 nonprofits that really span every area that you can think of: healthcare, employment opportunities. We had an expungement clinic. We had barbers on site, nail technicians on site, where people could just go and get resources for free. Because again, I think that it kind of goes back to my earlier answer about just not advertising the services and resources that exist. And so that was a great opportunity to, number one, get resources into the hands of community, but also get these organizations talking to each other and establishing like referral partnerships amongst one another. Of course, I was present during Philly Pride itself. I had the opportunity to march and then also enjoy the festivities both on the Parkway and then in the neighborhood after that. But there were a multitude of events. I think I had an event pretty much every single weekend during the month of June. So great opportunity and offered a lot of opportunities to just reflect on what Pride even means.
Speaking of that, what do you think Pride means at its core, at like the very deep parts of it? What do you think it means?
I think it's a call to action. Obviously when we think of Pride and we see Pride celebrations, it is a moment of joy. And I think that's important. I think we live in a time where there are a lot of questions about what it means to be an LGBT person, whether it's safe to be an LGBT person. And so we need those opportunities to just fellowship and be amongst community, and just experience joy. But the other part of that is, I think hope and joy, these are calls to action. They're not just a platitude. And so how do we have conversations with each other about how we're showing up for one another? How do we take back the mantle in terms of how we define our own community? How do we push the limits on where it is that we're welcome and where it is that we're not? So I think that any opportunity where we can be together should also be kind of complemented by other conversations about more mobilizing that needs to be happening.
So what's something that a lot of people don't really see as a challenge of the LGBTQ plus community that's deeper, more hidden, more behind the scenes kind of thing?
In terms of my job, or in terms of like what it means to be a LGBT person?
In terms of what it means.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is that coming out is not a one-time thing that you do, right? So as I mentioned, my parents found out that I was a part of the community when I was 15, but coming out has been a lifelong experience because of the assumptions that society makes, right? And so every time that I start a new job, I kind of have to get a sense of like, what kind of an environment is this? Is this an environment that's safe for me to come out? And how do I do that? How do I do that in a way that's not going to affect or limit my opportunities in this new job? Similar, as I mentioned, I played basketball. I still play basketball 4 or 5 times a week. Try to play in as many leagues as possible. But that's also an environment where I kind of have to negotiate with myself whether to come out and what that looks like. So I think my answer to your question is just that LGBT people have to come out continually. It's not a one-time thing that you have to do.
So what could people do that can help support LGBTQ plus communities and help them strengthen the systems that they might already have in place?
Yeah, I think being an ally, right? Being an ally to LGBT people. So when you're in a space, whether it's a barbershop or a gym or your workplace, and you hear, homophobic jokes or transphobic jokes, call it out. Like, don't put the onus on the LGBT person in the room or LGBT people in the room to defend themselves. Take that on yourself. And understand that it's also heard differently in the same way that, when we're talking about women's rights, as a man, when I speak up for my sisters, it's heard differently because I'm a man, right? And so it's important. Allyship is important, and it's a verb, right? It's not just something that you call yourself, it's something that you do.
So when things get difficult, what's something that you can always hold on to, and what's something that you can always give you hope?
Honestly, for me, that's young people. I spent a lot of time talking to young people. I was actually just reflecting on this. We have a couple of interns in the office this summer, and their unapologetic advocacy for themselves is something that I wish I had at that age. So, some of the things that I accepted as normal, that were never normal and are not normal, are things that young people today that I'm seeing enter the workforce are just not accepting. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So when I think about all of the chaos in the world, at this time, I think about the young people and their just tenaciousness and their tenacity rather in advocating for themselves and not accepting the status quo just because that's always been the case.
What do you think you would want people to know about your work and your office and what you do?
Yeah, I think I want the city of Philadelphia to see our office as a connector, right? I think one of the things I talked about in one of the articles, that I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah, I love, yeah, yeah, absolutely. We improvise.
I fought with many warriors in my time. They were far stronger than all of us put together.
Good to go.
Did we stop recording? Okay.
Ready?
So, what would you want people to know about you and the office and what you do and what it supports?
Yeah, about me, I'm not always going to get it right, and I think that sort of humility and understanding is something that is really important for anybody in a leadership position, whether it's this office or really anywhere, whether it's in school or whatever space you occupy at the time. I'm not always going to get it right, but I will try my best to. And one of the things that I said, I think it was to the Philadelphia Gay News when I first started the role, is that I hope to bring stability to the office. As I mentioned, the role was vacant for a very long time. And I think that one of the biggest disconnects between the community and government, whether it's city government, state government, federal government, is trust. And that requires time and investment. And so my focus is on being as visible as possible, being as approachable as possible, and listening.
You mentioned Philly Gay News. Can you tell me more about that? That sounds interesting.
Yeah, so Philly Gay News is it's the main LGBT newspaper in the city. The publisher is Mark Siegel, who's an incredible activist in our city, was present during the Stonewall riots in the 70s. And we're just so lucky to have him in the city as an activist and as a leader, and me personally as a role model of what it looks like to offer leadership in this space. And they essentially just publish articles with respect to the community, but also articles, just news generally, right? But it's an LGBT affirming newspaper.
What would success look like for you in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, things like that? What's the goals for the future?
My goal is to bring connection, right? So like I said, I've talked to a lot of nonprofits, and you'll talk to one nonprofit just as an example, and this isn't a real example, but just to mention one, you'll talk to Mazzoni, and you'll hear from them. These are the top 3 things that we wish that we could provide to our community if resources were infinite. And then you talk to another organization like Gallet, and you'll learn that those services are already provided. So it's a matter of getting organizations like Mazzoni and Gallet to talk to one another, and just establishing partnerships as opposed to essentially duplicating resources. Just create a sustainable referral partnership. So that's the goal. My goal is to essentially be a convener to bring stability to the Mayor's Commission on LGBTQ plus affairs. And again, just to be a bridge. That's the goal.
What are your top 3 things that you want to do?
Yeah, so like I said, I think the top 3 priorities are going to be public safety. And that's particularly relevant now, just conversations with the police about how they interact with the community, and just instilling in them a reminder that every interaction with the police is experienced differently by an LGBT person, just given the history of the relationship between the community and the police generally. We have a great commissioner who understands that dynamic, and is receptive to conversations about doing better as a department. Of course, workforce development. And so what that looks like is, just as an example, 2 weeks ago, I had a meeting with the chief human resources officer for the entire city of Philadelphia, and I brought her into a room with different nonprofits that do workforce development to just make sure, number one, that they have access to the jobs that are available with the city, so that, again, those resources are shared, so that people can apply and show that they are worthy of those positions, just like anybody else. And then healthcare, right? So we're really focused on just making sure, especially as the changes to Medicaid come into effect in January, that people know what those requirements are, and that we're doing anything possible to help people achieve the requirements, to make sure that they stay connected to healthcare.
Okay. That was the last question.
Awesome.
How did you feel?
I feel great. Like I said, I love talking to young people. I appreciated you sharing a little bit about your story. I love that you went to Central. What class?
287.
287. Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, I wish you the best luck.
All right. That's Gerard Thompson.
Tito Valdes.
Yep.